Welcome to the Franchise Woman podcast, where passion and purpose collide, profits are made, and relationships forged. I'm Rebecca Monet, CEO and Chief Scientist at Zoracle Profiles, along with my co-host, community advocate, speaker, author, and entrepreneur, Tracy Kawa. Today's guest is none other than Dr. Lauran Star. Dr. Star is known for transforming leadership and organizational culture by pushing the edge of status quo to achieve greater employee engagement, culture, inclusion, and diversity. Being the first inclusion and diversity psychologist in the United States, Dr. Starr's focus is on evidence-based inclusion, diversity, and equality. Wow, Lauran, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. It's a mouthful. It
It
is
is
a
a mouthful,
mouthful.
but
Yes.
fascinating, absolutely fascinating.
Yeah.
I'm really excited about the topic today. But before we even get into DE and I and defining all that, I'm curious to know about your background and what led up to you even becoming an organizational industrial psychologist.
Yeah. I think I was always on this path. When I think back to growing up, growing up as a kid, diversity was always around me, although I didn't recognize it. Um, when I was a senior in high school, we adopted my brother, Christopher, who is from Haiti. And when we adopted him at 6 months, he was full-blown AIDS. So we took in a Black child in a predominantly white town. Plus add the factor that it was in the 80s. He was HIV positive, had seroconverted. I mean, there was a lot there to take in. And my mom immediately reached out to Christopher's external family. Right. So like my first foray into inclusion really was at home where we had Christopher, who now, a year later is now walking and talking. And my mother's like, I don't know anything about Christopher's culture. So she did the next best thing as she reached out through DCF, Department of Children and Services in Massachusetts, and said, is there any relatives that we can talk to?
Aww.
And then by the next summer, we had the entire family, second generation grandparents, grandmom, granddads, aunts, uncles, all over to the house. And they would come like every other weekend. And so, right. So, I mean, when I say multicultural, it was awesome. And the stories and sharing of the food and the culture and understanding the Haiti culture, right? Because Chris is Haitian and there's a lot there that's not African American. So, it really forced us as a family to research there, hence the research. And now I was all about HIV. But it really forced us to research different cultures and really just see the beauty in them. And I held on to that. I really did. I held on to that right up through. I then, I joined the military at one point. Loved that. Talk about forced inclusion.
Yes.
Right. So once again, here I am. I'm a trauma medic in the Army during the first Gulf War. And they're like, hey, guess what? You get to go. Woo! Right. It wasn't a matter of me going, I don't think so. I'm a woman. That's not an option. So here I am with a flight crew of all guys and myself. And I never felt different. There's this forced inclusion where I have to rely on these gentlemen as much as they have to rely on me, or somebody's going to get killed.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we're talking life, right? Like it's not a light lift. It's a pretty heavy lift that I have to trust that they are as articulate and as well versed in weaponry as I am.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm the trauma medic. So I have to lean on that and lean into that. So I really didn't, in doing that, coming out of the military really was my first like foray. And that was like back in 1996 when I walked into an organization in medical sales. And right, this starts my business life, got my bachelor's, my business life starts up, and all I'm hearing is the glass ceiling.
Yep.
And honestly, ladies, I looked around and I'm like, I don't see a glass ceiling. Like, if there's a glass ceiling, you'd see up people's skirts. Like, I'm not making that I'm like, I don't get what you mean by this glass ceiling. Well, in order to get ahead, you have to, basically, yes. And I my background in theater, I never gave up my values and morals. I'm certainly not going to do it in the business world. And honestly, in looking, I'm like, I don't see a black glass ceiling. And if I see that glass ceiling, I am going through it.
Yeah.
Or I'm going to leave. Right. I mean, it's pretty that's it. And I started noticing that there were some individuals that were leaning heavily. They were leaning into the glass ceiling. In other words, I can't get ahead because of the glass ceiling versus I can't get ahead because I don't have communication skills.
You know what? I really like that you have addressed this. I'm quite a bit older than both of you. And I hit the workforce in the late 70s. And my entire life, there was a couple of times that I would say there were some gender differences and whatever, but it was very, very rare. And we actually had someone on the show that talked about the glass ceiling and the gender gap and da da da. And I'm like, how is it I've gone all these years never experiencing it, never experience it, didn't understand it, couldn't see it. And she was pointing out things, in business and her life. And I'm like, I don't see that as a gap. I don't see that as a ceiling. I see that as an opportunity. So this idea that and I'm putting words in your mouth, so correct me if I'm wrong. You're the brilliant one here. Is if I believe in something, I'm going to see it. If I believe in something, I'm going to create it. And that it may not be there as much as what everybody has talked about is what I'm hearing in your experience.
Yeah. I think if right, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yeah.
So I think so. You start looking and noticing like you're going to be attracted to organizations that maybe don't have that glass ceiling. Like we're looking for opportunity. We're not looking for areas where we're going to be limited.
Yeah. And even the pay gap, right, which has gotten quite a bit of attention. And I tell my college students this story. I adjunct at a couple universities in the area, and I share this, especially with my female audience, that I was underpaid once, and it was the first job out of the military. And I'm sitting across the bar from a gentleman who's also working for this company. Both of us are going to do medical sales. I have the medical background. He sold copiers. Right. So we'll consider our backgrounds a wash.
Same thing, Lauran.
Right. I'm like, okay. He was making 10,000 more than me.
And
I looked at him and I was like, there's no way you're making 48 to my 38 and still getting commission in the car and all that. I'm like, there's no way. And he's like, yeah, I am. And I said, how did you manage that? Like, what makes you different? And he looked right at me. He goes, Lauran, did you ask for more money?
It's all about negotiation. It's all about belief in self.
Yes. And I was like, what do you mean ask for more money? Right. I came from the military. You got paid based on your grade. They have phenomenal salary equity. Right. You only get paid on your grade. That's it. And here I am in the workforce. Yeah. I'm like, oh my God, I was just excited I was going to get paid that much. And he's like, yeah, let me show you. And let me show you how to negotiate.
Nice.
And showed me to ask always for 20 to 30% more based on what you bring to the table. So it's not even here's the offer. It's you go in and you know what your worth is. And that was the only time I lasted with that company for a year, flew out the territory, and then went on to my next company where, trust me, there was no salary compression. I was paid exactly what I was worth, and I've never had to worry about salary again. That's that other component. I don't care what people are getting paid around me. As soon as you take ownership of that salary, you don't care what people, I don't care what people are making around me. I know what I'm making and I know why I'm making that. And it may be higher than yours, it may be lower than yours. It's never lower than yours. But right, but that was a skill I had to learn. And that's a skill set that I learned from, somebody that was in the workforce a little bit longer than me.
Yeah. And you were willing to learn.
Yes.
Not and instantly assign that this is happening to me because I'm a woman. You didn't even think to assign that, in large part because of your military background and because of your family background. You didn't even assign, oh, I'm a victim in such a way. You simply said, I don't know how to negotiate.
Yeah.
Great. I
was like, wait a minute, you asked them for more money and they gave it to you? He's like, yeah. I'm like, well, that's pretty cool.
Mm-hmm.
Wait, so you have this incredibly diverse background. And by the way, thank you for your service to our country.
My pleasure.
And you were in the military, you came out, you went into medical sales. So at what point did you say, hey, I'm going to apply all of these skills to organizational industrial psychology?
Yeah.
Like, where did
like I played in the corporate field for about 10, 15 years in sales. Then I got pregnant.
Okay.
And when I had my son, I had my son and then I had twin girls shortly afterwards. And we decided that I was going to take some time off. And in taking some time off, I started, the researcher in me kicked in. So, my husband would joke, my wife takes time off and she's reading clinical journals.
Right.
And really at that point there, I was like, I can't go back into a corporation. I know too much. I need to start my own consulting firm. So I started this consulting firm. And believe it or not, at first I was really focused on just women in leadership. It lasted a short period of time because it was my executive females that were saying, you're in the wrong space. You really need to be doing diversity, equity, and inclusion work because of your background. Like you have an innate understanding of it. But more to the point, you have the courage to call out when it's wrong.
I like that you said that. I was telling Tracy before you jumped on, I said, you're going to be excited to meet Lauran. She's very opinionated and she's not afraid of sharing.
Not afraid of sharing it.
Not afraid. But your opinions are based in logic and based in research. It isn't just a feeling or an idea. You definitely have this. I want to get to, you've mentioned diversity and equity and inclusion, all of those things. And in my mind, and I'm thinking in our listeners' minds, we see those as sort of amalgamated. They're sort of one and the same. But that's not how you see it, correct? Can you?
No, and you can't look at it that way. Yeah. So, I always tell organizations, even the organization that I'm currently working with, right, we have to level set first and foremost because diversity is one thing. Inclusion is another, and equity is the third prong, right? There's 3 prongs there. They each have different meanings. They each need their own goals and metrics of measurement for success and strategy. But a lot of companies don't get that. So when I ask companies, what does diversity mean? I get the definition for inclusion. Or I get the definition for equity. And I'm very quick to be, nope, time out. So diversity, right, for our listeners here, diversity really is just the affinities that make us unique. That's it. That's what diversity is.
So if you take examples, give us examples.
Yeah, if you take a bag of Skittles, I love this, and you break that bag of Skittles out and you separate all the colors, you'll have a pile of orange and yellow and red and blue and green and purple. When they're all separated out, that's workplace diversity. Think about it, right? That's workplace diversity where we know who and what affinities are working for us, and we can report that out if need be. That's workplace diversity. Now,
that doesn't sound like it's necessarily like any kind of race-based or religion. It sounds like it's everything. It could be skill-based even.
It could be skill-based. It could be veteran status, disability status, right? It is a hair color. Do you wear glasses? Do you have facial hair? Those are all affinities. We have 8 protected classes, keep in mind, like age and gender and sexual orientation and veteran status and disability and ethnicity. There is only one race. Let's level set here, the human race.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know that we have any aliens among us, but there's
Not
the
yet.
human race. We are 98% alike genetically. So our affinities, the diversity, is only responsible for 2% of our differences. That's it.
Wow.
That's it. All right. So that's your diversity. And now the goal of diversity, the goal, the be all of diversity is diversity of thought. That's it.
Mm-hmm.
That is your benefit of, right? We hear all these case-to-case benefits out there. And this is what drove me crazy in my dissertation phase of my PhD. Everybody's telling me the benefits of diversity. No, those are all the benefits of inclusion.
Wow.
Diversity is diversity of thought or counting them. That's all you can measure. That's it.
Counting them, what is them?
Like a group of yellow, a group of green, a group of, yeah. So diversity gives us the diversity of thought. Now, inclusion comes along, which really needs to be your foundation. Inclusion is creating a culture where everyone feels valued, where everyone has a voice at the table. They feel they're heard.
Mm-hmm.
So we go back to the Skittles bag. If we then take all of those colors, put them back in the bag, shake the bag up, put 3 in your hand and pop them in your mouth, inclusion is tasting that rainbow. When you put a yellow in with an orange and with the purple, you're going to get a very different flavor than if you had a green, a yellow, and a red.
Mm-hmm.
Inclusion is tasting that whole new color scheme in your mouth. That's inclusion, right? Being at the table, being valued, being heard, allowing to share your input. Equity is a whole other beast, right? Equity is all about employees getting what they need to succeed. And we'll just leave it at that. Like, that's the definition of equity. It's actually a legal term, not a workplace term, which is, I always find interesting. But yeah, so, right. So we need to level set that D, E, and I are different. And when we look at, right, we go back to the evidence in every study I looked at, and I'll tell you at this point here, I think I've read every D, E, and I study up until 2020, like rip through them. In looking at all of the studies, the one thing they all had to have in place when we talked about diversity was an inclusive organizational culture.
So it boils down to that.
It all boils down to that. If you have a workplace that is inclusive, then that diversity of thought, the goal of diversity, will thrive. You'll find better outcomes. You'll find reduced conflict. You'll find increase in productivity and job satisfaction because people are happy to be there. If you just have a workplace that's diverse, you have a revolving door. People aren't going to stay. People leave companies and bosses. They don't leave for the money.
Mm-hmm.
They leave culture and they leave their management. So if you've got a management team that's not inclusive, if I'm coming to meetings and I'm getting spoken over, I'm getting eye rolls, nothing I bring to the table has follow-up or follow-through, I'm going to leave. I'm going to take my ideas and all the training you gave me, thank you, and all the insight into your business model, thank you, and I'm going to take it to the competitor. Right? Who's inclusive?
So diversity not only causes a revolving door, but it sounds like it could reduce the amount of thought or ideas or opinion, whatever. Someone's not going to step up and share as much in a diverse environment if they don't also feel
included.
Right?
Yes.
Heard, significant, valued, all of those kinds of things. That's really interesting, how you've clearly defined
Mm.
these things. What about bottom line? You know, a company that's focused on just diversity as defined, how do they do financially? Is there a benefit, or is there any logic that says, oh, well, at least we're making more money, even though we have a revolving door? No.
No, no. So the kicker with all of that is when you have inclusion, you get all those benefits and then some, right? Those benefits are heightened. They go up a few more points because you have diversity of thought. The minute you remove inclusion, all you have is diversity. And when all you have is diversity, employees will leave. If there's no inclusion, employees will leave. And we know replacing talent is expensive. It's roughly 1.5 to 3 times their annual salary to replace them,
Mm-hmm.
which is right. That's a lot of money you're just throwing away. I've worked with organizations years ago. I worked with a large organization that extremely diverse. We are extremely diverse, extremely diverse. I lasted 3 months, to be honest. I walked in the door as a consultant, and they were not inclusive. It was a meritocracy culture. It was toxic. It was, employee against employee. There was tokenism. I mean, it was just horrible to work there. Their turnover rate was 46%.
Oh my goodness.
That meant that they had, for their current workforce at the time, 3 people every day were leaving.
Oh my goodness, that's
Can you
crazy.
imagine the expense
And the CFO's like, but
disruption?
our profit margins are in the millions. I'm like, your profit margins would be even higher if you just worked on your culture.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And the response was, we don't want to work on our culture. We like our culture. I'm like, well, then fine, I quit. Have a nice day. Because there's nothing I can do here. Your culture's toxic, right? Without that inclusion, then then you're just employees, and nobody wants that. In the franchise industry, turnover can kill you, and turnover happens quickly, right? What's better is bringing in these employees, be it high school kids, college kids, older adults, bringing these and having them stay. My son works for a franchise business out here. They're a meatpacking franchise, and it is not the glorious job of glorious jobs. Just going to say that. He loves it. He's like, he goes in there, he laughs. There's all different education levels. It's very diverse in employees. He has such a great time while he's there. He feels he's heard. He feels he's listened to. They've enacted upon some of his ideas.
Wow.
Right. Like, he's like, oh yeah, I'm coming home for Thanksgiving because he's in college. And he's like, they called me and said, hey, any chance you could come home a little earlier to help? Yeah, not a problem. I'll talk to my professors, and spoke with his professors. He'll be back on, Tuesday to help out with all the turkeys. Yeah, I'll come right back. Not a problem. I mean, not even a second thought, because he enjoys working there. I'm like, Raph, you're going to have to get an internship for the summer. He's like, as long as I can go back to the meat place on the weekends. Like, I'm going to miss that family.
Well,
they don't have turnover. I'm not surprised they don't have turnover.
Yeah.
Dr. Star, I have a question for you.
Yes.
So, are there statistics on how many organizations are actually open to exploring their culture and working on their culture? And did that number change since COVID?
The number, it's interesting, Tracy. The number hasn't, right? It's not COVID that impacted that number. Let's take a step back. George Floyd impacted that number.
Yes.
We saw this huge pop in the industry around DE&I shortly after George Floyd. And now we had all these organizations that were jumping up and saying, we're going to focus on DE&I. Our employees are demanding that we take a social stand. Fine. So we see this huge pop. where we now, we now can argue according to Korn Ferry, right? 98% of the organizations, or 98% of organizations that were new to DE&I jumped on board because of the George Floyd incident. What's interesting is only 17% actually have a strategic plan. Right. So, right. But if you ask any organization out there, are you doing DE&I work? The answer is yes.
Because they think they are.
They think
really
they are.
think they are. They don't know what they don't know.
They don't know what they don't know. And, I do feel bad for business leaders, because I think, we've all been sold this bill of goods that by improving diversity, we're going to see productivity go through the roof. We're going to see our profit margins increase threefold. Well, that's only if you have inclusion, right? There's a huge, it's like diversity is the icing, inclusion's your cake.
Mm-hmm.
Diversity is that icing on the cake. Yeah. So, we're all supposedly doing DE&I, but are we doing it? And those numbers, statistically speaking, are very low of organizations. Less than 17% of organizations are actually doing effective DE&I work.
Wow. Can you give us a little more information about this idea of equity and how it works in companies or doesn't work? I want to move into inclusion, but I want to make sure we
cover up on that equity
and equity. So tell us how that works or doesn't work in companies.
Yeah, it's funny. In my book, Evidence-Based Inclusion, my last chapter, chapter 12, is to be or not to be, equity versus equality. And I'll let your listeners know right now, I'm still knee deep in research. So I am still that's my next book coming out, but I am knee deep in research right now, looking to see, does equity do anything in the workplace, right? Equity is providing your employees what they need to succeed. So if you hire someone who doesn't have the skills to be a manager, you're going to provide those skills for them to be a manager, especially if they're in a marginalized group, right? If their affinities are marginalized. Equalities, everybody gets the same thing. And I'm sure the majority of listeners have seen the ballpark fence where you've got three kids trying to watch a ball game. And you've got a tall kid, a middle height kid, and you have a child in a wheelchair. And they're like, this is equality. They're all at the fence. That's not equality. Equality is when they all buy tickets to the ball game, right? And they can all sit and watch the ball game. The fence is the fence is a barrier. But regardless, and then they say equity is the tall kid gives up a box for the middle child. The middle child now stands on the box and can see over the fence. And the person in the wheelchair is given a ramp up to a level that they can see over the fence. And we call that equity. And again, ramps, those are accommodations. That's not equity. Right? Again, I come back to, in that chapter, I come back to, wait a minute here. What about buying a ticket and sitting in the fan seats? Like, it removes the whole equity versus equality debate. Organizations from a developmental lens, we want to make sure that our employees have what they need to succeed. We want to ensure that we have developmental and career paths for them so that they can move forward. And they're fairly easy to create. And that development can be internally as well as externally. And we provide that to everyone. When we then look at the equity lens, right, that equity then can be utilized to promote more marginalized employees, if that's your goal. But at the end of the day, do they have the skills to be promoted? And then what did we give them for those skills? So it's a real fine line. I'm still shaking it out. I'm not sure how equity should fit within the workplace. I know we talked a little bit beforehand. I'm definitely anti-salary equity because I wouldn't make as much money. just point blank. I know my values and I know my worth. So I'm very much against that, but we'll see. But that's the next book coming out. So there'll be more on that.
There's something about this conversation that reminds me of when I'm talking to a parent and a parent says, yeah, I have like 2 or 3 kids and I treat them all equal. And I get so confused, like how I know my 2 boys, they are completely different. And to your point, I can totally relate to your Haitian brother because my younger son is actually half African American, half Haitian. And he's always saying, I don't put enough spices and hot sauce on things.
Yes.
Totally relate to that. But aside from that, my 2 boys are beyond different. I don't understand that whole like, no, equal. One has to have the same exact that the other one has. No, they each have to have what they need.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
But I think for me, it gets cloudy between, okay, which is that equity? So that would be equity. Giving them each what they need is equity. If I try to like put them in a bucket and treat them exactly the same, would that be equality?
Yeah, the argument gets made that equality is when you go sneaker shopping,
Okay.
you buy everyone sneakers.
Okay.
Okay.
He doesn't need sneakers.
Equity is, yes, equity is when you go, okay, but this son already has a pair of sneakers and he actually needs a pair of dress shoes. That's
Right.
equity.
Got it.
Right. And again, right, we're splitting lines. So keep in mind, equity is for the workplace only. It is not for your home. Right. It's not for society. Equity is a workplace term. It's a legally coined term for workplace equity. It doesn't play really a role in external, right? That's socioeconomic.
Yes.
Right, leveling, right? That's a whole nother show on how to improve that. But yes, right, it's providing your employees with what they need. Now, proponents of that or components of that, right, does that mean if I hire someone who is marginalized and is missing 5 skills, do I, as an organization, have to pay for that individual to have those 5 skills built? Yes, you do. That's equity in the workplace.
Only if you want them to succeed in their roles.
Only if you want them to succeed in their roles. And if you don't want them to succeed, then that's a token employee. Like, let's call it what it is.
Yeah.
Right. And that's right. If your company has a strong and deep developmental program, leadership management, whatever, ready, set, then you should be able to meet those needs fairly easily. But there's a lot of organizations that don't have that. There's a lot of organizations that don't have that.
Right.
And to what level?
Mhm.
And then we start sending employees out to business schools to get certifications, and right, it starts getting expensive. I don't know. I guess I am of that mindset. Like, if I need a certification, I go get it. If my company offers to pay for it, great. But I don't think to go to my company first and demand equity.
Yeah.
So it'll be interesting to see how it plays out.
I can't wait till your research comes out on the equity versus equality, because this is an interesting topic and one that has become progressively more, we're becoming more aware of it. Let's go to my favorite part, inclusion. All right. Inclusion. So you started this conversation off with that there are many benefits of inclusion, and that many of us are confused with this idea of diversity and equity, that the true benefit really comes from inclusion, which sometimes does happen when we have a diverse workforce. Tell us a little bit more about inclusion and why you're so passionate about it, and why every franchise or every company should really be thinking about inclusion.
Yeah, right. So from franchising to organizations, right? Inclusion, when you have an inclusive organization, the data supports, the evidence shows increase productivity, increase in profit margins threefold, decrease in conflict, which is always a nice thing, better interpersonal relationships. You have lower turnover. When you have inclusion, you will naturally attract highly talented, diverse talent. So we do see companies that have excellent, right, that are really knee deep founded. I think about Johnson and Johnson, right? They are so inclusive. They're also one of the most diverse companies I've ever worked for.
Great.
They really are. And everyone has a voice at the table. And it's not lip service. This is how they have built their organization. And it doesn't matter which company you go into under that J&J umbrella, be it Neutrogena or Ortho McNeil or Janssen, or it doesn't matter. They're all extremely inclusive. And because of that inclusion, it does attract those employees that are going to go into the workforce and thrive there and do their job. When we don't have inclusion, you're not going to attract the best and the brightest. I always say inclusion is like, if you build it, they will come.
Right.
Think about lipstick. I'm going to pick lipstick because I'm assuming most of our listeners today will be women. And we all know lips frame the face.
Mm-hmm.
Frame the face. Yeah, exactly. Lips frame the face. Lipstick is the number one product for every makeup line. Number one product is lipstick. It's their highest profit maker. And it's the number one item bought. Right? Think about how many tubes of lipstick you have.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Because you can change your lips and it can change your whole look. It's great. Well, back in the 60s, makeup companies had two shades.
Oh,
June Cleaver, right? That pinky pink. And then they had what I call evil red, which is an orangey red that we know those wicked women wore, right? In the 60s. Oh, she's wearing that red. That was pretty much it. It was two shades of lipstick.
I didn't know this.
Yeah, I know, right? Lo and behold, this company brings on 3 women into their R&D department. That's research and design department. And they had a pretty inclusive organization, I guess you could say, like looking at them from a critical lens of inclusion. It was mostly men, but they seemed really nice. And they brought these 3 women in. These 3 women changed the entire makeup industry.
That's cool.
Because one, right? This is how important inclusion is. One man at the table said, so what colors or what do you like about lipstick? Why do you wear lipstick? What's the background? And then he listened. And all of a sudden, the art of coloring, think about that, right? And we take it for granted. I can tell if you're a summer, if you're a winter, I can tell what shade. All of a sudden, the art of coloring exploded. And this line goes out and starts producing colors that, right, predominantly for white women, but through the years now, right, there are thousands of shades of lipstick. And is it matte? Is it shiny? Is it lip stain? Is it a chubby stick? Is it a gloss? Right, is it moisturizing? Is it drying? There's so much now to lipstick that really came from just that one organization being inclusive. That's how important inclusion is.
That is so cool.
And it starts with one person.
Mm-hmm.
And now we have it on Zoom. We can use the filters to change the color of our lipstick.
I know.
Isn't that awesome? Or give yourself eyebrows.
Let's do it while you were talking.
I love it.
It's great.
The word you use, though, and I think it defines in large part what inclusion is listen. They created an environment that allowed these women to feel they could share their opinions, even though it was different than the norm at that time. And they listened. So these women, even though it was a male dominated industry at the time, felt included, felt significant, felt heard.
Because these men listened to them. They were like, well, the lipstick's a little dry. It can be a little cakey. And they're like, oh, Oh, that bothers you? What if we did this? Oh, that would be a little bit. Right now, you've got a true R&D team, and right, inclusion creates solutions for problems that you didn't even know were out there.
Yeah.
So, it's really important, that our employees are heard and valued, and it's, you create that culture where you can openly share concerns or potentially new processes. We don't have to do it like we did it in the 90s. We are in 2022. Right? We can change, right? When we look at business, right, back in the 1990s, right, in the 80s, even in the 70s, it was very transactional. You give me this, I give you that. Well, globalization is here. We are a transformational based book of business, meaning that we stay with our customers. Our clients stay with us because they like us. There's a relationship. It's more than just here's $2, here's a pen. It's here's $2 for that pen. Let me show you how this pen can change your life.
Wow.
Right. But a lot of businesses are still stuck in that transaction phase, looking at DE&I as quota attainment. We have to have DE&I. We have to have X% of women of color in this position. And I always step back and go, why?
Yeah.
I'd much rather you have an organization that, is inclusive and right and can build upon that value, because you can put those women in that position, but if they don't feel they're heard, they will not stay.
Yeah. Doesn't matter what color they are or what culture they come from if they're not.
And that's it. I am sure your franchise, and I encourage your franchise owners, look at the diversity that you already have, because I'm betting you have quite a bit. A lot of factors come into play when we talk about diversity. Location is one of them. I'm up here in New Hampshire, let's be honest. Diversity up here is the different flannels you wear. In fact, that would be a great business up here, I'm just saying. Right, but it's all about the different flannels you wear. Oh, and then maybe if you carry a gun. There you go. There's our 2 diversity points. I mean, we are predominantly white up here. It just is what it is. We don't have, right, and we don't have the infrastructure that supports diverse communities, right? That's a state level thing. That's a society issue. So I can't look at businesses up here and be like, well, you need to have more people of color. Well, if they don't live here, you can't get them here. They can't afford to live here, right? There's so much more that comes into play. So I tell your franchise owners, look around and see what diversity you already have. That could be disabilities. It could be veterans, right? Play to your diversity strength. What is the diversity that makes up your customer base? What is that? When I started my own business, the biggest mistake I made coming right out of the gate years and years and years ago, 20 years ago, is I only worked with women entrepreneurs. That was it. So coaches that worked for me had to all be women, and all my consultants were women. And if I needed a new ad campaign, I would go to a female owned, right? But here's what I did, right? Is I just really narrowed my lens. It wasn't until really much later that I started hiring more male, right? Different. It all of a sudden became, I was looking at quality of work versus the gender who's doing the work.
Right. Or the age.
And it really did. It changed up so much for me business wise, because, at the end of the day, we all have to get along. We all have to work together.
Oh my gosh, we could go on and on and on about
this
topic, but we do need to wrap up. We're at the top of the hour. Lauran, before Tracy does her wrap up, tell us about your book, where we can find it, and how folks can get hold of you.
Sure. So if you want to get a hold of me, just go to my website, drlauranstar.com. That's Lauranstar.com. Lauran. And my book is called Evidence-Based Inclusion. I have copy somewhere around here. It's right on my website. You can get it on Amazon. And shoot me a note from my website. I mean, you have questions, I'll answer them for you. I'm here. I'm in your corner.
Perfect. Tracy, your final thoughts.
Like my mind is blown. You have opened up my eyes to so much this
Oh, I'm
morning.
glad.
Amazing. Love this. Totally want to dive into this area. I do want to say that your name is Dr. Star for a reason. You are an absolute rock star.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. Lauran, I really appreciate you carving out time for us. So thank you again. And thank you to our listeners for listening in to the Franchise Woman podcast, where passion and purpose collide. We'll see you next week on another episode.